Good morning, Andy.
Good
So,
morning, Raj.
welcome. So you're in a small village north of London. How's life up there since the lockdown?
I mean, we're pretty lucky because we are in a small village. So, we're allowed out for one walk a day, and I take full advantage of that. We don't meet many people, so we're actually pretty good. There's space, and there's not too many people, so we can keep a safe distance. And everyone seems to be observing the social distancing rules, and everybody seems to be observing the UK government rules. So here we're okay, but I know that's not the same for many people who live in much more sort of cramped conditions in towns and cities up and down the UK. So yeah, we're in a good state here.
No, that's good. Well, you guys stay safe. So tell me a little bit about your company, Andy, what you guys do.
So Mind Fitness, we're a cognitive training company. So basically, we deliver face-to-face, but now also online training, and it's around mental health and well-being. So we teach people skills to understand more about how to keep themselves mentally well, and that goes with physical wellness as well. And we use neuroscience as a sort of backdrop to all of this. So none of it is theoretical. It's all based on evidence from science. And we teach this in organizations and for individuals. So it's all about really unlocking potential in people and allowing people to be as well as they can be, both mentally and physically.
Interesting, because a lot of people talk about, physical well-being, physical fitness, but your business is all about mental fitness or mind fitness.
Yeah, so when you think about how much time and energy many of us put into keeping physically active, we know that we should be doing this. People run, go for walks, join gyms, but actually we don't invest an awful lot of time in our mental fitness, our mental health. It's almost like we overlook that. And of course, there is this brain-body connection that you can't really have physical health without mental health and mental health without physical health. It's very difficult. So we need to stop thinking about the two as being sort of detached and think about health and do more, I suppose, to work out the mind as well as the body. And then we can actually have good, unified, good health, that sort of complete the mind-body connection.
That makes a lot of sense. And you also, on a previous conversation with me, you were mentioning mental health first aid. So can you describe what that's all about then?
Yeah, so this is a movement. I mean, it's probably been going about 15 years. The mental health first aid movement began in Australia. Mental health first aid is like physical first aid in that the primary focus is to preserve life. There's a terrible statistic, in the developed world where more people in the UK, for example, die by suicide than die by road traffic accidents, which is extraordinary. And I mean, it's a massive difference between how many people die by suicide. So we have a mental ill health epidemic in the developed world, and mental health first aid does quite a few things. First of all, it gives people skills to understand more about mental health, how to look after their own mental health, how to help other people to look after their mental health, but also to spot the signs of poor mental health. So, for example, if you find that somebody is in crisis, mental health first aid training will give you the skills to be able to approach that person and offer some support. So, we're not clinicians, we're not there as a sort of medic, but we're first responders in the sense that we can offer some sort of assistance to that person. But it's also, I think, about dealing with stigma and dealing with the things that keep us not talking about mental health, and pushing it into the background. Right. So it's about encouraging conversations and making sure that people talk to each other and people start to feel more comfortable about the fact that we all have mental health, all of us. And we're concerned about when that mental health deteriorates and we start to have poor mental health. So it does a lot of things, and I think everyone should think about, if you have the opportunity, becoming a mental health first aider, because they're brilliant skills to have.
So I'm curious, how do you actually become a mental health first aider then? What's the steps you go through?
Well, again, I think it's different as you go around the world, but most countries have a mental health first aid organisation. So in the UK, or actually in England, we have mental health first aid England, and so I'm trained by them to be an instructor. So I instruct people, I run courses, and I basically qualify people as mental health first aiders. And here in the UK, you do a 2-day course. It's very intensive, but it's also actually really enjoyable. You know, people actually find it incredibly rewarding. And at the end of that 2 days, as long as you've got through the 2 days, you're certified then as a mental health first aider. So it's pretty easy to join in, to get involved.
Yeah.
And the sort of person who becomes a mental health first aider is the sort of person who is probably, easily accessible in an office. So, they're not remote. Now, obviously, that's quite difficult at the moment because we're all pretty well remote. But then there are all sorts of courses for other people, from short courses just to become aware to the 2-day course, which is a qualification, a recognised qualification. And most countries will have similar courses and similar qualifications and similar knowledge to learn.
That's really interesting. So, because you mentioned, the times have changed with the pandemic, and now we're having to think about working remotely and looking for skills that we can apply remotely. So, tell us a little bit about how things have changed, how you've seen things change in the past couple of months.
So, I talked about the proliferation of suicide, and and it is a worry, in the developed world. Especially in men, men tend not to talk about their problems. Men tend to keep things to themselves. So, we were talking about before the pandemic hit that, we have serious problems in the developed world with managing mental health, with people dealing with poor mental health. And that's, largely through an increase in anxiety. So vastly more people feeling stressed and overwhelmed. And depression. Depression is a massive cause of suicide, or can be. Now, of course, here we are in a situation where, we go from steady state to suddenly all sorts of things are happening. You've got the threat and risk of health to ourselves and our loved ones. Maybe we know people who are ill, and in some cases we know people who've sadly died through COVID-19. So again, we're living in a world of threat, but also we've got threats, economical threats. People have either lost their jobs or their jobs are on hold. People's businesses and livelihoods are disappearing. And we don't know what the world is going to look like in the future. We don't know when we come out of this, and we will come out of it, but what will the world look like? So there's a lot of anxiety now in our lives, and it's difficult to escape. There are very few people who you would say are unaffected by this. Most of us are, and most of us know people who are probably struggling, quite significantly, even if we're not. And so I think that we are going to see a massive requirement for mental health support. And I suppose the other element of that as well is that anyone working at the front line, here in the UK, we're lucky enough to have the National Health Service, and these people are utter heroes, absolutely diligent, putting themselves in the line of fire. But the downside for these guys is that coming out the other side, the prediction is that many will be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
So societally, we've got a huge challenge to support people through and out the other side of this, and and again, in our varying ways, it could be just being there to speak to people, through to doctors and specialists being on hand to support people.
Now talking specifically about the contact center industry, we've seen a dramatic shift from many large in-house contact centers to a lot of them actually pushing all their staff to work remotely. So for all those managers and executives watching this interview we're doing with you, Andy, what sort of advice or tips can you give them to make sure their staff who have been pushed away from the office, maybe working in isolation at home, what sort of ideas and tips can you give them so that these staff don't feel too isolated?
Well, Roger, I suppose, the number one thing is communication. That's critical. And, I would I'd recommend kind of regular catch-up calls, possibly using Skype or other types of, webinar type software so you can see and hear the person. Mm-hmm. And just build in regular catch-ups. Because again, if there are problems brewing, you might well be able to spot that if you're having regular conversations with that person. For me, communication is critical. All the work that we do is about establishing lines of communication, making sure that there are regular chats and, not just work related as well. How are you doing? How are you getting on? Is everything okay? If you need to talk, I'm here. Those sort of conversations are really useful. So it's not just about stats and the sort of work-related stuff that we tend to focus on when we have our work meetings.
And what about, say you're a manager and you're starting to get the feel that maybe one or more of your staff are, feeling depression, very depressed, they're down, they're not communicating well with you as well as they used to in the office. What sort of, without going into too much detail, but what sort of things can you start to look out for? What can you start to do? Any telltale signs? Anything you can change?
Yeah, well, again, because we're not clinicians, we're not professionals, we're not trained necessarily to spot as a doctor would, for example, but there are telltale signs. It's the change in behaviour, and we're all different. If you know someone as a type of personality that's normally quite bubbly and they're quite reserved, and that happens over a period of several days maybe, then that could be a telltale sign. Someone who is normally not very combative, becomes quite aggressive, quite spiky in their responses. Again, that could be a bit of anger creeping in, a bit of frustration. So again, all of these things are signs to be able to have a conversation or start to have a conversation with that person. How are you doing? No, how are you really doing? Is everything okay? Are you coping okay? Anything you want to talk about? That's a good sort of precursor to allow those conversations to happen. But it's about changes in behaviour. It's about changes in personality. And we all have bad days. We all have off days. We wake up with a terrible headache or something and a bit cranky. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about that consistency of watching somebody maybe decline. And that's the signal to sort of have that open and honest conversation. Or try. You can't make someone talk, but you can at least be there for them.
Sure. And just, taking that one step further, say you are talking to somebody and you see things are deteriorating. We can't go out and see people. We can't bring them into meetings, or we can't, take them out for dinner and have a chat, a nice cozy chat. What do you do if you feel you've done everything you possibly can, but your staff's working remotely? What do you then do? How do you then escalate things so that you can help them?
So again, I would say that there's an awful lot of support online. Every country has great charities that support mental health, give you lots of clues and information about how you can support people. There are still lots of helplines and chat groups and what have you. So again, somebody may not want to talk, but may indicate that it's starting to get to them. And so offer to send some information, some links, some useful links, etc. Because in the end, all you can do is give that person information. What I would add, Raj, and this is really important, that if anyone ever says anything that indicates that they seriously contemplated suicide. Suicidal thoughts are relatively common, but if somebody says that they've had thoughts around suicide, you need to take that very, very serious indeed. And in some cases, it's worth alerting the emergency authorities. So get the police involved. Because it's much better to have overreacted and that somebody has just had a bad day and expressed some very negative views and look a bit embarrassed, about sending the police around. The alternative is horrendous. So don't be afraid to react accordingly if you see threat, if you feel that there is a crisis there.
Now, I know a lot of our viewers, managers and executives looking at this interview we're doing with you for for how they can actually help their own staff. But what about those managers and executives who are used to interacting with their team face to face? What sort of things do you suggest that they do so they don't feel isolated as a manager, of maybe a large contact center? Now they've got nobody to meet every day.
Well, I'd say actually meet people, and this is where the regular meetings come in. I think it's good to build in that meeting time. So again, you've got things like Zoom where you can have multiple screens and various people on the call. Have your team meetings, get everyone together, get that unifying spirit going, get people chatting to each other. I think the other thing as well is have a few energizers every day. Maybe before the shift starts, have a Zoom meeting and have a quick quiz or something of that nature to get the team built together, but also as you as the manager to interact with others. And I think that's a really great way of maybe starting a day or even finishing a shift. As people come off, a quick debrief, what went well, what didn't go so well. The technology exists, use it. It's quick, simple, easy. I'm not talking about great long meetings, just quick catch-ups. Anybody can put their hand up and offer their personal opinion or ideas for the next day.
Excellent. There's some good tips there. I think one of the tips that I'd like to say to everybody watching this is that, what we're talking to you about, mind fitness, mental health first aid, isn't something we're just going to do now. We should continue on with this fashion and our interest in this subject, well beyond when the pandemic's all over, because it is such a big issue in business today with people.
Yeah, it's largely been overlooked. I mean, there are some countries doing sterling work in promoting better mental health. And other countries lag behind, but the fact is it's part of the human condition. It's not going to go away. It's likely we're going to need to put more focus into this area, and the sooner we start, the sooner it sort of helps more people. So this is a really great time whilst we're working from home to start to plan how you're going to introduce this type of training or this type of education into your business, into your contact center. It benefits any business. There are no businesses out there that don't benefit from this. And the stuff that I do, the work that I do, I sometimes get really small businesses who send 2 people to one of my courses, and I work with large companies as well. And there is always a lot of interest in it. It's a very dry subject. It's a very difficult subject to embrace because it's the last taboo, mental health. But actually, when you start to broach it and people start to talk openly about it, it just opens up a whole new world of openness and honesty, and people also being aware of their own well-being. So it's about creating, it's not just about education, it's about creating a sort of well-being strategy in your organization to promote good health and to promote the fact that we can all help and support each other, and somewhere that has a high level of well-being is also somewhere that's working at a very high level of productivity. there's one thing I wanted to mention here that there's the stats are around well-being in organizations, that for organizations that introduce these well-being strategies, there's this very profound return on that investment. In some cases, it's seen as about 4 to 1. So every pound you spend, you get 4 back in productivity, up to sort of 10 to 1. So it's not a dead end thing. Support people at work, help them to support theirs and others, mental health. But actually, you get a happier business, you get a more productive business. People take less time off, aren't sick. You get attrition rates fall, but also this thing called presenteeism, the people who turn up to work when they're ill and they shouldn't be there, and their productivity is negligible. And that's actually one of the biggest things that businesses are dealing with now, is presenteeism. People who are just not fit to be at work, but turn up and don't really offer the business very much at all. So again, it's about sort of educating around that and getting everybody working at the best they can be, with a high level of well-being within the organisation, and a culture that supports it from top right the way down to the coalface.
Really interesting stuff. And I know, you're a fountain of knowledge. You've got lots of years of experience working in the contact center space as well. You and I have worked together many years now. I'm hoping that when this is all over, we can get you back to one of our events and have you as one of our keynotes again, sharing all the wonderful stuff you're doing. I want to thank you. I want to say to you and your family, stay safe and stay well. And when this is all over, we'll meet up sometime in London and maybe have a beer and talk about next steps.
That would be great, Raj. No, brilliant. And again, to all the Contact Centre World's members all around the world, please do stay safe, and we'll see you at the other side.
Thank you, Andy. Take care of yourself. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.